This video discussion is about food poisoning, corresponding to Goldfrank's Chapter 39. The learning objective for this session is that you'll be able to identify at least 3 toxins involved in food poisoning. And I could have struggled to add some other objectives, but this is a pretty weird chapter already, at least how it fits within this whole series of video discussions. There are several food poisoning subtopics that are covered elsewhere in this series, including poisonous plants and mushrooms, seafood toxidromes, and botulism, which has its own chapter in the textbook. So what's left over to talk about here is a bit of a mishmash. The other presentation, entitled Seafood Toxidromes, focuses only on poisonings from eating the flesh of swimming fish, those with scales and fins, but there are some shellfish poisonings that share a common mechanism, where there's an accumulation of toxins produced by dinoflagellates or algae, such as occurs during red tide overgrowth conditions. There's paralytic shellfish poisoning, neurotoxic shellfish poisoning, and amnestic shellfish poisoning. These are typically caused by ingestion of toxin-contaminated bivalve mollusk filter feeders like clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops. These shellfish poisonings are rarely seen clinically, but when they do occur, there's often a local outbreak with multiple victims who ate from a common source. Paralytic shellfish poisoning occurs from saxitoxin, as shown here, and it clinically resembles tetrodotoxin poisoning. Neurotoxic shellfish poisoning occurs from brevetoxin and clinically resembles ciguatera poisoning. Amnestic shellfish poisoning occurs from domoic acid, and we see that structurally it resembles a number of endogenous excitatory neurotransmitters. Most cases of food poisoning, though, occur from bacterial contamination. With salmonella, the food poisoning is actually an infection from ingested bacteria, and it's treated as such with antibiotics. Bacillus cereus is a bacteria that produces a heat labile toxin and is most commonly associated with cooked rice that's been stored improperly. Staphylococcal enterotoxins are a common cause of food poisoning, and if you've ever heard of mayonnaise or potato salad going bad if left out too long, it's because of staph. Another notable bacterium in food poisoning is E. coli 0157H7, which, after being ingested, elaborates a Shiga-like toxin, producing HUS, hemolytic uremic syndrome, which is the most common cause of pediatric acute renal failure. Now we're finishing up with some true food poisoning-related miscellany. MSG, monosodium glutamate, has a reputation for causing flushing reactions, but this is poorly documented and disputed. It's true that MSG is added to some restaurant foods, and that MSG is found in plenty in soy sauce, but calling this Chinese restaurant syndrome seems awfully biased. It's monosodium glutamate that's responsible for the sensation of umami, which imparts a fullness of taste and savoriness. It's why they grate Parmesan cheese on top of your entrees at some restaurants. And I'm using specially mixed umami salt, which includes MSG, inosine, and guanine, at home in my cooking. And the final food-related poisoning I and the chapter wanted to mention is the cheese reaction, or tyramine reaction. There are several foods that contain relatively high levels of tyramine, which very closely resembles the biogenic amines. On the list here, we see that these are mostly foods that are aged or fermented. Normally, when we eat tyramine-rich foods, we never absorb much of the tyramine because it's broken down by monoamine oxidase in the gut. Thus, there's a huge first-pass metabolism of tyramine, and everything is okay. Go right ahead and eat these tasty aged or fermented foods. But if the patient is taking monoamine oxidase inhibitors, this allows a lot more of the ingested tyramine to be absorbed. And because it's so structurally similar to our normal biogenic amines, the tyramine is uptaken into noradrenergic nerve terminals, where it acts as an indirect sympathomimetic agent, causing release of norepinephrine and dopamine, potentially producing a hypertensive crisis. Therefore, patients prescribed MAOIs need to be educated regarding what foods to avoid so that they wouldn't get headaches, nausea, palpitations, and chest pain if they ate the wrong things. And there are many other different ways that poisoning can occur through food, but that's all we have time for. I'll be seeing you around.